Seattle, where you can probably see behind me that the sun is out, which in the fall is a great accomplishment. Really appreciate the Genome Sciences team at the University of Washington and the UW-Medicine for hosting us here. Our advisory panel members and some of the NIH staff got to do a tour of the genomics facility last night, which was great for helping people like me who barely understand genomics to understand the technology and the whole process and what happens to a sample. So it's been great to be here on the Seattle site. So thanks to our hosts. You know, my summary up front here is the State of the All of Us research program is strong. We always have challenges, but the great thing is a consortium of now over 2,000 people in more than 100 locations around the country is we tend to be able to figure out how to solve those problems together in some pretty powerful ways. And just the talent last night here at the Genome Centers, we have some of the top genome experts in the world who've come in from not just our UW team, but also the Broad Hopkins collaboration around a genome center, Color, who's our recently announced genetic counseling resource, and also Baylor in Texas. So they're all here converged in Seattle, and the brilliance and diversity of people that we have working on the genomics effort is pretty exciting. To start out, people always ask me about enrollment, so I just want to give a little bit of an update around enrollment here. You can see what we have, the red line we call participants, and those are people who have at least consented and started some aspect of the study. And participants who have completed the entire initial steps, the slide cut off there, the entire initial steps of the initial protocol. So have consented to join the study, have consented to share electronic health record data, have actually had their physical measurements and biospecimens of blood and urine captured, or if blood didn't work, then a saliva specimen, and are some simple physical measurements like height, weight, blood pressure, and those kinds of things. So we continue to do quite well. You know, almost 6 months ago, we were already the largest and most diverse cohort that NIH already had, and since we're growing like crazy and maintaining that diversity, we continue to excel in that front. There's another 40 or 50,000 people above that who have at least come and said, hey, I want to be a member of this and pay attention to it, and many of them then do go ahead and consent and actually join the study. So we've certainly had more than 300,000 people say, hey, I'm interested enough to sign up and learn more about it. So pretty exciting on that front, and of course crossing the 200,000 mark of people who have finished that core protocol is a great sign. In terms of who are we, I'm a member. I actually got to finally have my physical measurements and biospecimens captured when our traveling exhibit actually came to Portland, Oregon, so I was able to do my blood draw and urine specimen and get my physical measurements taken. I was not pleased with my weight. I am doing everything I can to give up desserts because it was a moment of shock when they handed me my card and said, this was your weight that we took with all your clothes on. I did have my cell phones in my pocket, I tried to point out, but I don't think that made that much of a difference. In terms of gender identity, you can see the breakdown here, and many more people who identify as a woman, which is pretty typical for large cohort programs like this. But we have plenty of men signing up as well. You know, and importantly, one of the fundamental aspects of this program is it's the reason we have the name, all of us, is to try to really reach a diverse group of people, many who have been left behind by traditional biomedical research. And we're doing quite well on the race ethnicity front. You can see the breakdown here. Those numbers add up to more than 100% because many people click multiple races when they're actually going through our survey mechanism on that. And sort of where is it in terms of our total goal? You can also see the age distribution here. Out of the gate, we're still recruiting 18 and above, though the focus on children is something that we've reserved resources and spots for children when we're ready to actually go through that. But right now, 18 and above, you can see the age breakdown. And then you can also see we do have participants from all 50 states. Obviously, in some states where we have health provider organizations, we have a lot more people from those states. We're still working on the direct volunteer mechanism to sort of increase the capacity to cover other states and be able to do events and things like that and help people follow through with their physical measurements and their biospecimens. And we actually recently finished 4 additional language kits. So this is not all of our collateral in simplified Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and Arabic. But as we worked with community partners that focus on both those cultures but also those languages, they said, look, we just need a critical mass of content to be able to help people understand and recruit and get them interested in it. So everything's in English and Spanish, but also then these 4 language kits that are helping us to make some progress, particularly with Asian communities. And then the interactive mobile exhibits, there's 2 of them. I just mentioned I did the one in Portland. So there's one that can't do biospecimens, but the new one that we built, you can actually have biospecimens captured right there. I have to say the phlebotomist was so great that I was like, can you always take my blood? Can you come to my doctor's appointments and take this? Because they were so gentle. It wasn't a big deal at all. So here's just a few interesting factoids for 2019 so far. We can continue to exceed our diversity target. So our diversity target was over 10 years to get to the point where we had 70% or more underrepresented in biomedical research. We're currently at 81% and have been sitting there for months and months and months at about 81%. And then greater than 51% of those 202,000 people who have finished the entire initial protocol based on racial and ethnic minorities. So you could imagine that we could be in a very different place in time less than 2 years since our national launch, where we don't have the total numbers or we're nowhere near having recruited this diversity. So I think the approaches of having community-based partners helping us build knowledge and trust of different communities is key. I think the approach of having all of our awardees have clear incentives and they're measured on whether or not they're achieving the diversity is paying off. And coming out of the gate, focusing on diversity as opposed to waiting for a few years and see what happens, I think that was the right strategy to take, because I don't want us to go down from this, but only keep going forward with this. The other factoid here, another factoid here is our recruitment rate of core participants. So people finishing all of that initial protocol right now is 3,000 plus. I think we're about 3,300 last week. And we're moving over time towards 4,000 by adding more clinic sites and the direct volunteer mechanism. And over the next year and a half or 2 years, getting to 5,000 a week. So that's how we get to 1 million with our current goals between 2023 and 2024. So that ramp up continues to work as we sort of grow the program over a period of time. We added to that end, over this past year, we've just added 135 new enrollment clinics. If you think about the early days of the program, even some of my advisory panel meetings and some of the open parts of the advisory panel meetings, like I was celebrating when there were 6 clinics and then 10 clinics and then 20, right? So while it is more routine and more streamlined for us to add 135 new clinics, remember all of those clinics go through a basic process of like alpha testing with friends and family, then beta testing with real participants in that region and getting feedback on everything from the in-person experience to the training of the staff. And then once all of the beta metrics, we actually then release them to go start recruiting more broadly and aiming towards those overall recruitment rates. So thrilled to see that going. We have a lot of new partnerships with dozens of new awardees and community partners. You've probably seen announcements that we put out recently about new, what we call CPGI, Community Partner Gateway Initiative partners coming on board. These are the on-the-ground organizations that are often part of national organizations, but they have reach in almost every part of the country who work with us locally to do messaging, to help us understand how do we build trust, what are the issues that are relevant to that community that we should be paying attention to both scientifically as well as practically. So really glad that that network has continued to grow throughout 2019, and I think it will continue to grow as we go forward. And some of those community partners are shifting their roles. In their particular community, they may have done a real good job of just doing initial awareness. What is biomedical research? What is the All of Us research program? And they're shifting to other roles where they may be taking on roles for retention, like, hey, let's do an event to help bring people in to actually do their next surveys, or let's go focus on a particular topic that's come up a lot in this, or let's do an event to get input from the community on what kinds of scientific studies they would like to see done, that would have impact on their community. So it's nice to see not only an increasing number of those community partners, but shifting roles as their sort of existence within a particular location matures over a period of time. Since they launched these community partners, which has been roughly not quite 2 years now. The All of Us Journey exhibits have spent 565 days on the road and engaged about 55,000 people. Remember, our exhibits travel to places where we don't have any health provider organizations, or we haven't had any direct volunteer clinics through Quest or Walgreens set up in that environment. So sometimes for many communities it's the first exposure, and then creating that awareness and the ability now to do follow-through of actually PM&B, physical measurements and biospecimens on board, has been great. And then significant progress on our 3 main priorities for 2019. I talked about these at the last advisory panel meeting in the open session. I'll give an update on those. So I'm feeling really good. I'm a worrier by nature. There's constantly things I worry about, from budgets to okay, how are we going to retain all of the people that we've actually done? But I'm kind of like, first things first. If you don't start recruiting people, you can't work on your retention challenges. So in terms of where we've been operationalized and set up as a program, I'm feeling good, but I'd welcome your feedback as the advisory panel in the Q&A in this section. Those 3 top priorities. So remember, we originally had 5 to start the year, and then we got realistic and said, look, we don't have the staff and the team right now to make a lot of progress on assays. In other words, what are we going to do with blood and urine other than genomics? And we don't have the people in place right now, so we paused our work on children. Those are still top priorities. Those will become top priorities in 2020 as we've gotten some of these top 3 priorities done. But for the sake of 2019, the consortium was really clear with me, and it was not hard to make this call, that we need to focus on these 3 areas. So how do we scale up that diverse enrollment and retention? How do we get genomics going end to end, from let's get approval to start sequencing and genotyping to returning the first information to people? And then how do we start releasing tools that are going to be useful to the researcher and scientific community? And we released one of those back in May, the public data browser. So that's something that people can go to researchallofus.org and look at the public data browser, which gives high-level aggregate statistics, so not individual information about the program. So I feel good about where we've done on the we're working on some pilots right now to deepen our engagement and working on making sure that we're returning value to participants. The first major return we're going to do is genetics. So we recently, probably many of you saw the announcement that came out that Color had gotten the award for our genetic counseling resource. So they will both help run the reports on when somebody's DNA has been done, let's do the analytics on that. But then they also are the genetic counseling resource that will be open for anybody to call in and ask questions about anything that we return, as well as set up genetic counseling systems or specific genetic counseling sessions. So they're on board. We already had our 3 whole genome centers, partners who have been here in Seattle for the last few days working on the protocol and on all of the technology testing and quality testing of samples and all of that. And then we anticipate that first data generation, so we'll start genotyping and then sequencing, and the first return of results in 2020, hopefully early 2020. You'll see in more detail throughout the day of the advisory panel meeting as our genomics experts meet with you where we are with regards to things like our submission to our IRB, our submission to the FDA, and all of those pieces. And then Researcher Workbench, again, launched the Researcher public data browser already, but we are on a path towards getting our first curated data set that will have, in some cases for data like the first 3 surveys and EHR, well over 100,000 people's worth of data in it. So it's not a small first release of a curated data set by any stretch. And we anticipate then opening up the Researcher Workbench, which is the tools that you have to apply for as a researcher to then access the data set and use, to what's called the registered tier. So not the controlled tier where there's a higher risk of re-identification of a person, but the registered tier. And that alpha testing is occurring now and through the rest of this year, and then we'll do an open beta phase where particularly early adopter researchers and scientists who know kind of how to use these tools can come in and both explore the data set, but also help give us feedback on the tools that are there. Many of you remember and know from many meetings, I'm a user-centered design person by background, right? It's like I believe in the power of, before we had participants, we had proxy people to represent those who we might have as participants. Now we have actual participants who are part of our governance, part of our committees, and part of our scientific efforts. I believe in getting feedback. We did this for researchers as much as we did participants. We did surveys of researchers of existing tools and capabilities that they use, what they expect to use in the future. We have a qualitative segmentation of different kinds of researchers because not all researchers are the same. So just like we did for participants, we have these personas of thinking about who are the research community that we're trying to reach out to. So this process, this user design process that we do is like identify a product or a goal or something that we're trying to make happen in the world, actually go study the people that are going to eventually use that, then design and build some really crude early prototypes that don't even work, even screenshots and things to get feedback from people, which we've done, and then build working prototypes that are real and that you can do alpha testing. Alpha testing tends to be a phase where it's kind of in our family, in the All of Us family, testing it first, and then opening up the beta, which again we're trying to do in early 2020, where researchers who have not been part of the All of Us research program can come and do it. And then we evolve and iterate. Community feedback is key, and we've made a conscious decision as a program to release a data set and the tools like the Researcher Workbench earlier in our program. There's some research programs that exist for a decade or more and collect data before they actually give anybody access to the data set or give them the tools to access that. We've made a conscious decision for a number of reasons because we think getting community feedback early and often will help improve the curation of our future data sets as well as improve the tools that we're doing, but also because we've made a commitment to give information back to participants. Like, we can't wait that long, right? We've made a conscious decision to do this early and often, and I'm excited when we release this, that it will be out there. The important information that everybody needs to take away from this is early adopters are going to be the likely users of this. It's going to take a pretty tech-savvy or data informatics-savvy researcher in the first phases as we do this beta phase. We're already working on tools that will open it up to more researchers who maybe don't have as good of programming skills or who don't know how to use some of these really modern sort of big data tools. And you hear about big data all the time in the headlines. We're already working on those tools and building them. But in the first instance, when we release this in 2020, it's going to be a pretty, sort of early adopter audience. And it was our early adopter personas that we were very consciously aim for getting their feedback when we do this open beta. So as we think about people in the country who aren't scientists who may want to do research on this, it's still a commitment of ours. We're still working on capabilities, but it's not going to be ready, at the launch of this. So I just want to manage expectations with everybody that you start somewhere, you get community feedback, and you improve. And every time we release new tools and data, there'll be new features that allow more researchers and scientists who could use it to use it each time, as well as new tools to do things with the data that they wouldn't have right when we actually launch the beta phase. What does this mean for the Researcher Workbench, right? So, this is that process from the last slide just spelled out. I already sort of talked through all this, but, our goal is to open up a data set and tools for researchers. We are the All of Us research program, right? If we don't get to the point where we're providing de-identified data to researchers and the tools to use it, then we will have failed in our mission. Here's some of the kinds of the user-centered needs finding that we did. We are here in this alpha launch, and we talked a lot about this at our last advisory panel meeting. So this quick update is all I'm going to do on this topic today, since we're going to focus on genomics and retention for the rest of the day. But this is kind of where we are, and then the beta launch, when we open it in early 2020, we'll see how many people we can get to come and use it, and then we'll get their feedback on it. And then what I would call a version 1 launch, when would we move out of beta? My guess is probably 6 to 10 months after we launch the beta. Depends on how many people come in to use it. Depends on what they discover that we hadn't already anticipated. But my guess is that we would take input from people for that first 6 to 10 months, and then we would release a new version of the Researcher Workbench with some updated features, some fixes for things that we didn't catch in our early testing, as well as then a cadence of eventual curated data sets. We're trying to get to the point where every quarter there will be new features added for researchers to be able to use things, and then help me, team, if I'm getting this wrong. I think it's like once or twice a year doing updated curated data sets. We might even get to a point eventually where we would get to quarterly releases of curated data sets, but it takes time. And as we have a new data type like genomics coming in, it takes time to curate that data and get it ready. So we don't quite know what the release of our curated data sets will be. as we stand here today. Last couple of things, so it was May of this year, right? We launched the nationally for the program in May of, it was the same day, May 6th of, I have to get the dates right, 2018. I keep forgetting that. On May 6th of this year, at our 1-year anniversary since national launch, we opened up the public data browser and had researchers and others talk about where we're headed, and we gave a preview of what was coming for the researcher workbench. I very intentionally at that presentation showed, for some of you that have seen it online, I took a Sony Walkman out. It took me a while to get access for a Sony Walkman, and I had a 90-minute tape in it. And for those of us that grew up with those, it was radical. Like, wow, you could put a whole album on a 90-minute tape, right? But man, it was a pain to get to the song you wanted. You were fast-forwarding and rewinding, and the tape would get caught in the mechanism, and if you're out running, your whole music thing is gone because it was, you're not going to be able to fix your tape out there in the middle of the jog or something. You think about the wireless earbuds where you can use voice control to basically get almost any song imaginable today. That didn't happen overnight. That came from a lot of different companies and researchers doing user-centered design over and over and over again. All right? Often we'll get these new products that emerge and we'll feel like it just appeared overnight. And it's like, no, that was 2 decades in the making, because it was this iterative process of getting early crude products out, getting feedback, improving them, and eventually creating something that's almost miraculous. I think we're on that same journey, right? I'm proud of actually, I think people are going to be shocked at what you can do with our researcher workbench when you put it out there. It's a really robust analytics infrastructure and computing environment and set of tools, but it's going to take a while to do that. This is a quote. What I said back in May of this year was, a year ago, meaning at that point what had been the national launch, we took our first steps on an innovation journey to begin recruiting. Now we're taking our first steps on an innovation journey with researchers, and that's where we are as we're close to launching the researcher workbench and moving from alpha to beta. What that means now is for the program, we now have our 2 major constituencies, right? Our 2 major customers always that we're going to have to take good care of. Participants, as we grow our tools and capabilities and our return and tools that the participants want, and then researchers. So, here we go. It's going to be a pretty big adventure to say we got to take care of these 2 constituent communities as we move forward in time. So that's a kind of quick overview. I know for those of you on the advisory panel, member, don't worry, we're going to dive into deep in genomics today, and we're going to dive deep into retention. But on these topics, any comments or questions anybody wants to make, I'm happy to entertain them. And don't make me call on people. That's like, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Bueller. Greg.
More sort of a comment than a question. I mean, one thing I appreciate in trying to do so many new things is that there are all various sort of hurdles and barriers. And one thing one thing I've been encouraged by is the recognition that there are sort of fundamental ethical responsibilities of this program, especially to participants. There are sometimes regulatory things. Regulatory and ethical are different. Regulatory is central and ethical is central and enduring. Regulatory is sometimes necessary, but we hope maybe temporary if it's outdated. But just want to encourage that continued sort of distinction between those and clarity about that. That our responsibility to protect privacy is ethical. There may be regulations about that, but that's really a fundamental ethical.
And existential for the program.
Yes, and central and enduring. Respect for autonomy, minimizing risk. Some of the other sort of, things we talk about there may be some regulations in those areas where we say, this actually isn't the best way to do it and it's a bit outdated. We may have to adhere to that for now, but actually do our best, because one of the missions of a pioneering program is to show how those things need to change.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like, I think there's a natural tension between us and our institutional review board that's natural with all studies. And there's a natural tension. I mean, we have a great relationship with our FDA partners as a sister agency as part of Health and Human Services. So people ask me if I get really mad, and it's like, well, I don't get mad. It can be frustrating not to necessarily agree on something, but it's like at the end of the day, I kind of understand that they're putting us through a process that is helping us achieve ethical and other practical things that we need to do as a program. And then those sort of second or third sets of eyes are sort of a positive thing for us. So, at the same time, when you're going through those processes and you think it's going to take this long and they come back and tell you it's going to take this long, that's when the frustrations occur. But I keep thinking of these as sister agencies and processes that are actually helping us to achieve, quite frankly, the data safety, the patient safety, and all of that we would want anyway. We actually passed our OIG audit for security this year, and people are like, oh, was that really irritating? And it was like, no, they gave us great feedback, and the good news is by the time their report got to us, we had already addressed all of the things that were in the report from a security perspective. But having that another set of outside eyes looking at what we were doing security practice-wise and saying, ooh, that's really good, ooh, you should probably look at that. Yeah, it's a pain to do all the paperwork and turn all that in, but when you stop and step back from it, it feels like a really positive thing. So.
And, one other thing I might say, you talk about these two sort of major constituencies and taking care of them. And, as a member of more sort of the researcher constituency, although I am also a participant, I might see those relationships a little different. I think the relationship of this program to participants is to say, what do participants want and need? What matters to them? And really to take care of them. Well, I think in the research community, there may be a little more ambitious mission to transform that community.
Yeah.
To not necessarily have this program adhere to what the research community wants and has always done things, but to say to the researcher community, maybe you need to be different.
Well, I'm for those of you who want on the advisory panel to help with our alpha phase and think that you have, let me know, because I would like some of you to look at the tools and give your own feedback, because we've been close to it, working closely with our DRC, the Data and Research Center, on a day-by-day basis. But I think some of you who kind of know it conceptually but haven't actually hands-on experienced it, I'd really welcome your feedback on it, both positive and negative, because that's the only way that we're going to improve it. But I agree with you. If all of this does is allow us to do research like we've always done it, then we will have failed in our mission. That's for sure. Other issues, comments, questions, or updates on things I didn't cover that you want quick updates on before we dive into genomics and retention? All right. Going once, going twice. All right, thank you. So we are here with our genomics folks today, so we will close the meeting for now, and we're going to do our deep dives into genomics. And for those that didn't get to do the tour last night, I'm sorry, but you missed a great opportunity. But they'll explain some of that in PowerPoint today, and then we'll dive deep into some early thoughts about retention. So thanks, everybody.